Welcome to Pause and Reflect, the podcast where compassion meets action, and where we dive deep into the stories of those who advocate for the voiceless, nurture our planet, and foster a more compassionate world. I'm your host, Alexander Taylor Clayton, here to explore the intersections of animal welfare, environmental sustainability, and the innovative solutions shaping our future. So sit back, stay curious, and join us as we reflect on the change we wish to see in the world. Let's embark on this journey together. Hello, listeners. This is your host, Alexander Taylor Clayton, and welcome to this episode of Pause and Reflect. I am incredibly excited to introduce our speaker for today, our inaugural I'm saying it wrong. Inaugural episode. Definitely editing that. Inaugural episode. Dr. Marc Bekoff, Professor Emeritus of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Colorado. He has published over 30 books, won many awards for his research on animal behavior, animal ethics, compassionate conservation, and has worked closely with Jane Goodall. Dr. Jane Goodall is a former Guggenheim Fellow, has published the book The Emotional Lives of Animals, and we are excited to have you here today to talk to us about animal ethics and all the work that you do.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And to start, Dr. Bekoff, your work has been pivotal in expanding our understanding of animal emotions. Could you share a moment of your research that profoundly changed your perspective on animal consciousness?
There's probably a lot of moments, and it may sound funny to some people, but when I was 2 or 3 years old and I was born in Brooklyn, New York, so I lived in a concrete jungle, I used to go outside and talk to all the dogs and cats and birds and ants. And in all honesty, and I used to ask my folks, what were the animals thinking and feeling? So that was a pivotal moment in many ways. And what I wound up doing for decades really stemmed from those early experiences. But my trip, if you will, into that trajectory was nonlinear. But my folks said I always minded animals. And I wrote a book called Minding Animals back in 2002 because I would mind them and try to care for them. And I minded them by attributing active minds to them. And then, I loved being outside and I always watched animals. So I think really it was just an accumulation of similar feelings. I would tell my mom, and she didn't laugh at me. I would say, I can feel their joy. I can feel their pain. And, and I think that somehow was some kind of subconscious or subliminal guide that got me onto the correct trajectory after years of, fumbling around here and there.
Right. So would you say that you had a pretty good upbringing then with your parents who sound like they were very open-minded individuals who were aware of the fact that there's more to life than just us humans. There's a whole plethora of life outside of our own.
Yeah, very, very much so. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I, I was a typical terror as a teenage boy, but who isn't?
Oh, I'm sure I gave my own parents a couple gray hairs growing up.
Yeah. But yeah, my mom was very empathic. My father was really very optimistic man. And I think that, whether it's genetic or not, who knows? But the environment in which I grew up was very supportive of what I wanted to do. And I was always told I could do anything I want. So I've learned over the years that not everybody has those sorts of experiences, and that, when you try to direct somebody into something that they're sort of only halfway there, if you will, it doesn't bode well for the future in terms of them doing whatever it was with a lot of enthusiasm. So, nope, I hit the ground running and really wanted to connect with and learn about non-human animals.
That's true. Not everybody gets to have that sort of understanding. I like to think that myself, I got pretty lucky growing up because I grew up with animals in my life. But to me, they were never. I never really thought of them as pets. I'm not even a fan of that word.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that they were fur siblings. They were siblings to me. They were genuinely family. So growing up, I was lucky. I kind of had that mindfulness where, to me that these are my brothers and sisters. Yes, they're different, but I love them all the same. And
Mm-hmm.
being able to grow up with that, there is a level of mindfulness that comes with that, where you pay attention to their body language, how they act and respond to certain things, and you get a certain level of mindfulness for other beings other than yourself through that. And I think that's very important in childhood
Mm-hmm.
development, but not everybody gets that.
No, but you're absolutely right. I mean, my mom apparently had been either chased by or bitten by a dog earlier in life, and so she didn't hate dogs. She was afraid of them, but she
Mm.
was still open to my craziness. I'm sure some of the neighbors in Brooklyn thought I was just a psycho, and um, but they let me do it. So no, you're definitely right. And I just you just keep rolling on doing. You hope you can roll on doing the things you really want to do. Although, like I said, my path to now or over the last decades was pretty nonlinear.
Hmm. Well, it sounds like you had a good start growing up with a big heart.
Yes.
Let's talk about compassionate conservation. It's a term that resonates throughout your work. Uh, for our listeners who may be new to this concept, how would you define it? What
Hmm.
and why is it essential in today's conservation efforts?
Yeah, it's a good question. Compassionate conservation really developed out of my work and the work of a few others, especially doing field research on animal behavior or behavioral ecology, social ecology. By realizing that, when you step into the life of wild animals, you're really an intruder, you're a trespasser. And so the first thing at a very general level is, just being there can change their behavior. But then when you start mucking around with them, trapping them, marking them, especially with using inhumane or, very harmful techniques, you're not only harming the individual themselves, but you're studying stressed animals. And so the data you collect may not, in fact, be representative of who these animals really are. Yeah, so compassionate conservation basically you could look at it as a branch of traditional conservation, but it really varies greatly in terms of the way it varies greatly for the types of research that it would find permissible. So compassionate conservation really focuses on studying mainly wild animals, but it could be animals in zoos or other captive animals, studying them in a non-invasive way, not changing their behavior, not harming them, not
Hmm.
trapping them, if you will, or if you're trapped, maybe using live traps, but not harming them and causing them to suffer psychologically or physiologically while you're studying them. There's a history to it, and my mentor Michael Fox years ago was very much a leader in the field, but really is not necessarily recognized as being a person right now who's pushing the envelope. But he really got me thinking a lot about the way in which we study the animals and how what we do when we study animals can change their behavior because we're bugging them. We're trespassing into their lives and we're manipulating them. So the first international conference on compassionate conservation was held at the University of Oxford in England in
Hmm.
2010. And a lot of people got together and we all worked together to form some foundation, to what the field is about. So the very first basic tenet of compassionate conservation is first do no harm. And the second one would be the life of every single individual matters. Then there's, you know, working hard for coexistence. But for me, what compassionate conservation really is all about is, yeah, you don't want to harm animals. And, a lot of people who harm animals tell you they don't want to harm them, but they have to. But we're not going to get into that right now. But to me, the basis of compassionate conservation is that the life of every single individual matters. So we focus on individuals, not on what biologists call collectives like populations or species. Because
Mm-hmm.
traditional conservation will play the numbers game. They'll say, well, there's 10,000 brown rats, so it's okay to kill 1,000 of them. And no, 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 that's not okay, because each and every brown rat in this example wants to live a safe and pain-free life. It would
Right.
be like,
That sounds like waving away collateral damage. Like in the pursuit of science, this is okay, but
yeah,
it's clearly very much not. If you value the intrinsic value of life, clearly
no,
it is not.
exactly. But that's what traditional conservation is often about.
Hmm.
The analogy would be, how would you like it if you lived with a dog of a certain breed or a certain mix, and somebody came into your house and said, "There's a lot of them, so we're going to kill your dog." I mean, I'm not. People think that I'm being, facetious. No, I'm not. I mean, that's what it's like. And the example I use is somebody came to me and said, "Well, there's a lot of human beings like you, so you can't exist because there's a lot of human beings like you." And
Oh, and there's humans who will make that argument too.
oh, yes, there are. But back to the conservation. So that's really what compassionate conservation is all about. Focuses on the well-being of every single individual and every single individual. And I use the word well-being very carefully, because animal welfare, people will say it does focus on individuals, but it really doesn't. I mean, because you have animal welfare standards for, say, research on laboratory mice and rats, laboratory rodents, and it's frightening, the millions who are killed during each year in the name of humans, in the name of science. And
Right.
welfare would say, well, we're doing the best we can, but if the costs to humans, that's what it really comes down to, outweigh the benefits to the animals, then it's okay to do whatever, or use whatever protocol we want to use. So
Right.
Jessica Pierce and I wrote a book called The Animal's Agenda that was published in 2017. And really the purpose of that book was to push for the science of animal well-being, in which every individual matters. And it was a natural extension from compassionate conservation, where the life of every individual matters. So that's, I mean, in a nutshell, that's really the foundation of where I was coming from for years. But right now, it would be those sorts of efforts to which I've really devoted my life, of learning about non-humans, but not harming them in the name of science or in the name of conservation.
Right. Well, this touches on a very hot topic for me as an environmental anthropologist. This is going to be a buzzword for the listeners throughout the entire season, but it touches on the concept of anthropocentrism, which you might be
Mhm.
familiar with, which is the idea that, you know, human beings are on the top, and then everything else in the natural world is there for our benefit, which is a very close-minded and single-minded viewpoint of everything, our entire existence and our framework within nature and our place in the universe. It's an illusion because we are not separate from nature. We are a part of nature.
Yes.
Everything works in a circular economy. So this idea of this hierarchy where we are on top and then everything else is to serve our function is just, well, it's highly unethical to start, but it's also just fundamentally false.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's harmful because we set ourselves up. I don't mean you and me, but the royal we a lot of humans set themselves up above and apart from other animals, not only above them but apart from them. So there's humans and all and everyone else, if you will. Um,
Mhm.
but that's changing a lot. I mean, there's still a lot of anthropocentrism out there, and a lot of traditional conservation would be highly anthropocentric. But I think things are changing because people are realizing that anthropocentrism is one of the root causes of the demolition of our planet. You
I
know,
fully agree with that. I
like,
think it's if we could say it's a multivariate problem.
yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, it's like the Beatles said, we're here, there, and everywhere, and we trespass into the animals' lives. And you'd have to be almost living in a cave not to realize how much of the loss of biodiversity there is, not only in terms of animal beings, but their homes, habitats, ecosystems. And that's another focus of my work. And it's also, I think, becoming a real common focus of people who push for compassionate conservation, recognizing that part of conservation is preserving the homes of non-human animals. So, as a field, it's doing well. There's critics of compassionate conservation, but I'm honest when I say that I think a lot of critics of compassionate conservation have never read a thing about what compassionate conservation centers on, because they'll say, well, compassionate conservation is not concerned with maintaining or increasing biodiversity. But of course it is. So I'm just saying that because some people think, so I was told, well, it's a very feminine view of conservation because of its focus on empathy and compassion. My response to that is it's not, but thank you. I mean,
To even say that is in itself a
no, no,
gendered
no.
and
I mean, people
sexist view of
have
the
said that,
issue.
or they've said it's really only the purview of wealthy nations. And that's just a load of junk because some of the best compassionate conservation is being done in India and various parts of East and South Africa. So the
Oh,
reason I'm throwing that out there is
absolutely.
because I get emails about that. And my response is just don't pay attention to them. I think they feel threatened by compassionate conservation because more and more we're showing that intrusions into the lives of wild animals really changes their behavior. So you can put the ethics aside, although that is an ethical question, but you can just say, look, people do horrible things to animals when they study them. They collect the data, they publish the data, but the data they collect and publish, you've got to put the behavior of a stressed mouse, a stressed coyote, a stressed wolf in because the individuals themselves are highly stressed.
Right. This is not an individual who's just out and about going about through their normal day, which just from a participation observer dynamic in research is virtually impossible to even obtain.
Yes.
But like you said, on top of that, they're going in and they're causing all these problems because again, they're not valuing this life. A lot of the times these are people coming in who really only value themselves and see the animal as an object.
Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, so traditional conservation and just just a whole lot of ways in which we interact with other animals really is based on objectifying them. They
Hmm.
become commodities, they become property, and
How
globally,
can this entity serve my interests?
exactly right. Yeah, so that's called the instrumental value. So I'm really glad you raised that, Alexander, because compassionate conservation really also deals with the inherent value or intrinsic value of each and every life. So it animals are subjects of a life. There is somebody who wants to live and thrive and live in safety and thrive and not be harmed or killed. Right, exactly.
Actually, I was talking about this just the other day with a colleague of mine. The topic came up because we were talking about the Russian-Ukraine war and animals just trying to like what's the difference between a dog who's just out in the street, rain's pouring down, they're just trying to find shelter, find a scrap of food, just how, how is that any different than what so many other humans go through? Just trying to find
Mhm.
shelter, a place to eat. These are all very basic things that all animals, including ourselves, want and need, and to just discredit it so blatantly just because that's not a human being.
Mhm.
There's a very particular version of morals there at play.
Well, I mean, you're kind of describing, classic speciesism.
Yes,
I
very
mean,
much.
that, once again, we're above and beyond. We're above and separate from other animals, beyond them, if you will, in cognitive and emotional and moral capacities, none of which is supported by science. And the fact is, it's not been supported by scientific data for decades. There's new information. I have a second volume of The Emotional Lives of Animals. My book just came out, and it's an extension of the first one. And I've added about 300 references that appeared in the last 17 years. So
Ooh.
even though there's a lot more known now, we knew enough back then. And in fact, we knew enough 50, 60, 70 years ago to know that when we step into the lives of non-human animals, we're harming and killing them.
Right. That's like I find parallels with that with the environmental movement with climate change. This is a topic we've known about since the very late 1800s that we've
Mm-hmm.
known as an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But because of our value system, we place no value in it. Therefore, it gets shunted to the side and ignored for 50, 60 years until it becomes an actual problem. And even
Yeah.
then.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people who deny sentience to non-humans, or wonder if they really have feelings, or wonder, if they're smart, or, you could just substitute any word in there, are just totally out of touch with science, and common sense. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we are not the only mammals who have evolved complex and really rich cognitive and emotional and moral lives.
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite examples that comes to mind whenever this topic comes up is the topic of elephants and the elephant graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking as an anthropologist, we have studies showing that elephants they create these graveyards. They remember where the graveyards are, and they will take annual treks year after year to visit this site and pay tribute
Yep.
to their ancestors. I'm sorry, but there is no argument on this good green earth that could be made to me that says that that's not culture.
Oh no. No, no, you're right. But it's easy to deny all these things when the denial, allows you to then harm these animals because they don't care, or they don't feel, or they don't know what's going on. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
just a rationalization that opens the door for brutally abusing and killing other animals.
No, well, we have a very ugly conversation coming in the next couple of decades on pet ownership and slavery and what all that means.
Right.
But to move on, throughout your career, have there been any particular animal encounters that have reinforced or maybe challenged your theories on animal emotions and ethics?
Not really. I mean, when I write, and I also write a lot for Psychology Today, I kind of keep a running list of, not only like in the new book, the second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals, not only a running list of new data, new science, new stories, but also a running list of, are we learning anything about, say, animal cognition and animal emotions that means that we don't have to be so careful about caring for them and harming them? There's never a checklist. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, never. So I might have a checklist of, wow, this is really interesting research. The data are very important and compelling. Does it allow us to harm the animals? And no, no.
Well, there should never ever be a criteria that allows that. There should never.
Oh, no, no, no. I totally agree with you. But somebody might say, well, you see, these lab mice don't feel as much pain as you think they do. And I've heard these stories.
Therefore, it's okay to do this thing.
Therefore, it's okay
So,
to
so,
do,
so.
harm and kill them and torture them in research. No, it's not. And in fact, those data don't support relaxing or abolishing the research. Yeah. I mean, it just, yeah.
Before we dive deeper into today's topic, I want to take a moment to talk about the heart behind our podcast, ROLDA, the Romanian League in Defense of Animals. ROLDA is more than just an organization. It's a beacon of hope for thousands of animals in need. With a dual mission of rescuing distressed animals in Romania and preventing animal suffering through effective spay and neuter campaigns, ROLDA has transformed the lives of animals and communities alike. Our efforts extend beyond rescue and rehabilitation. We're committed to creating sustainable solutions that address the root causes of animal homelessness and neglect. From building modern sanctuaries to provide a safe haven for animals, to education and outreach programs that foster a culture of care and respect, ROLDA is on the front lines, making a tangible difference every single day. But this journey isn't one we walk alone. It's the support from people like you, our listeners, who share our passion for animal welfare that empowers ROLDA to continue our vital work, whether it's by volunteering, spreading the word, or making a donation. Every action counts towards creating a better world for animals. To learn more about how you can be a part of this transformative mission, visit ROLDA.org. If you would like to donate to ROLDA and help save a life today, visit ROLDA.org/donate. Together, we can make a difference, one animal at a time. Now, let's get back to our story. Your collaborations with Jane Goodall and others have yielded rich discussions and progress. What has been the most surprising and enlightening aspect of working alongside such figures?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure a lot is surprising other than, people who are doing that work, including Jane Goodall, just work incessantly. And they're not getting away with not working and being lazy. And I really mean that. I mean, Jane is just always on the go, always working hard. The enlightening aspects are that Jane and others, they're very bright, they're very committed, they're highly motivated to make the lives of not all non-human animals better and richer, allow animals to live in safety. They're against inhumane treatment of animals, etc. I mean, there's no surprise there. And it's just hard. People ask me, what are some surprises about, the research? And I guess there's surprises, but I don't look at them as surprises because it means that, for example, in my work on coyotes, when I did field work years ago, and I study free running dogs, for example, when I see them do things that other people say they don't do, it doesn't surprise me that they're doing it. It sort of surprises me that other people say that they don't do these things. But that's really because they haven't taken the time, say, to watch free ranging or feral dogs who are on their own. They're watching dogs who are homed, companion animals, also, AKA pets.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, if you really look at it, each and every individual is having to adapt to their environment, which could be changing, ecological conditions, social conditions, whether they are typically live in a group of animals, but now they're on their own. And you look at the flexibility of their behavior, it isn't surprising that they can adapt. They've been doing it really well before we ever were on the scene.
Oh, absolutely.
But what I love is discovering new things. I guess the way I'd say it is discovering new things and not thinking of them as surprises, but thinking of them in terms of how flexible and how adaptable each and every individual is.
I like that. I mean, it's true because, well, when you think about it from just a biological standpoint, we do not exist alone in nature.
Right.
If we are capable of experiencing happiness, sadness, joy, fear, it's not a crazy leap to assume that there are other creatures who can also feel this wide range of emotions.
Right.
And we see it all the time. I mean, even if you go outside of primatology and those who are closely related to us, corvids, one of my favorite species of animal,
Sure.
ravens and crows, highly intelligent, cultured individuals who, if you pay attention to their body language, you can actually have a little bit of a dialogue going on.
Well,
It's quite remarkable.
Well, yeah, and all the work that's being done now on invertebrates and insects, and people call them lower vertebrates like reptiles and amphibians. They're not lower. There's no such thing as a lower animal. It's a convenient way to phrase it. And, the implications is they're not as
It feels
smart,
a little paternal, to be
emotional, blah,
honest.
blah, 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 blah. But that's just a load of crap. I mean, the fact of the matter is they're not lower animals. And you're right. I mean, that the more we study these animals, the more we learn about them. And we learn that they are intelligent. We learn that they're sentient. We learn that they don't like being tortured, or like if you're a lobster being dropped into a pot of hot water. You don't
Oh,
like, having your brain picked apart. But like I said, I'm an optimist, and I really believe that times are changing far too slowly for me, and I'm sure for you and many others. But there is change, and I like to give credit for people who are engaged in the changes that are happening. But number one, they're not happening fast enough for me, for sure. And number two, although I'm an academic, we need to get out of the ivory tower and into, if you will, not into the streets per se, but it was sort of into the streets, that we've got to turn all the discussions. Well, we really don't know that animals are sentient. We don't really know animals are conscious. We don't really know that animals have rich emotional lives. Well, of course we do. I mean, we've known it for decades, centuries. So, the bottom line for me, and the reason I did the second edition of the Emotional Lives of Animals, is to show people we know more, we've known enough for decades at least, but now no more excuses. No more, I'm doing this because we don't really know something. No, stop. And I really mean it. So I really look at the book as being a breakthrough book, saying no more BS. Just we got to do more to make the lives of all animals better and richer, and treat them much more humanely, and not harm them along the way.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And if I can get a little philosophical here,
Sure.
from my own personal stance on all this, it's my belief that in this beautiful, wide, ever complex, and yet somehow simple at the same time universe, I feel like it is the purpose of life, of intelligent life, that when they reach a certain stage of development, to sort of be stewards of life, to
Mm-hmm.
help propagate life further.
Mm-hmm.
And humans, having reached our current stage of evolution, being the dominant force species on the planet, I feel we have an ethical responsibility to help everything else around us get to where we are.
No, absolutely, and well put. I mean, because I like to think of these umbrellas of compassion and empathy, umbrellas of caring.
Hmm.
I wrote a book called The Animal Manifesto, where I wrote about increasing our compassion footprint, because at the time there was just a lot of talk about carbon footprints, for example, and there still is.
Right.
But I also like to think that we can all work together under this umbrella, just a big arena where everyone is focused on making the lives of each and every individual animal the very best it can be. Getting back to compassionate conservation, killing in the name of conservation is absurd. I mean, or killing in
It's
the
it's a
name.
it's a it's a oxymoron.
Right, killing in the name of coexistence. Well, yeah, you can coexist with a corpse, but I really do mean that, because
It's like we need to have war in order to have peace.
exactly right, and what it cashes out into, it's killing in the name of humans usually. Right. Well, we have to kill. We have to have war to have peace. Well, I don't believe that, but that's another huge topic.
It's
In
like
which,
we have to kill these animals so that way we can eat. It's not that hard to be vegetarian, good sir.
no, 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 or right, or we have to kill members of one species to help another species. No, no, you don't. Just stick.
Oh, that actually, I'm sorry. That actually brings up the thought that I had earlier
Mhm.
today that I was hoping I'd remember. Do you remember when the lanternfly came in and it was an invasive species? Do you remember this?
Mhm. Yep.
It was a couple
Oh,
years ago,
yeah.
and there were constant reports of, oh, this is an invasive species. We need to kill them whenever we see them. And even now, like in the last, I want to say 2 years, the script for that has completely changed. Where now they're saying, no, don't kill these. They've successfully supplanted the ecosystem of where they're the niche that they're coming in, and now they're actually serving a benefit to the ecosystem.
Sure.
I'm curious on your thoughts on this back and forth on this viewpoint of the lanternfly and in an ecosystem.
I really can't say much. I'm not an entomologist, but
Fair
but
enough.
but the type of the example you're given, the generic way to state that once again would be killing members of one species to save another. So right now there's
Yes.
a big discussion about killing barred owls to save snowy owls. I wrote about it 10 years ago. And so it surfaced again. And there's no evidence that killing one species of owl will save the other. In fact,
Hmm.
people argue that it has not really worked. And then there were experiments, give or take 8 or 10 years ago, to see if it would work. Now, to me, that's the most egregious thing in the world. You're going to kill some animals to see if it works to save the others because you don't really know whether it would work. I mean, that's really what happened. So, what I'm really glad about, I have not kept up with it totally, but over the last month, there's been an emergence or a reemergence in the conservation literature and in some popular outlets, once again saying there's still people who the government wants to kill, barred owls to save snowy owls. And what I love about it is more and more people are getting involved to say no. And, it's like analogous to killing healthy animals in zoos because you don't have room for them and they don't fit into your breeding program. And the poster animal, I always call him the poster corpse, was a giraffe named Marius who lived in the
Oh,
Copenhagen Zoo. So they killed Marius because he was otherwise healthy, but he couldn't fit into their breeding program. And there wasn't a word. They'd say, people say, well, we're euthanizing the owls and we euthanized Marius. No, you didn't. You killed them. Euthanasia is mercy.
yeah, I don't like how people throw around the term euthanize,
So
which to me is very careless in a lot of these
Oh,
conversations.
it's yeah, it's extreme. It's not. I would have to say it's not very careless. It's totally careless, but it sounds good to people. Oh, poor Marius, or poor flies, or poor barred owls. You had to kill them. So I came up with the term zoothanasia some years ago, and people are using it. And zoothanasia, really simply put, refers to killing otherwise healthy animals in zoos who can't contribute to a breeding program.
I'm going to remember that term and I'm going to be using that.
Yeah, I mean, and I wasn't doing it to be an ass. It's really what they do. So
Well, it is. It's a fancy way to say murder.
exactly. We euthanize them. No, you didn't euthanize Marius. You euthanized him, or you killed him. You murdered him. He was a healthy young giraffe. He just didn't fit into your breeding program. And people go,
Who had plenty of time left in their life to live, but because you couldn't fit him into this, it's like, all right, well, let's not deal with this problem anymore. Kill him off.
right. And other zoos and wildlife parks wanted Marius as an example. But zoos in Switzerland have killed lions. I mean, this happens. It doesn't happen very much in America, in the United States. And some people who I trust say it really hasn't or doesn't happen very much at all now. And I don't know that, but I do believe them. But it's kind of routine in some, not, surely not all European zoos.
Hmm. Well, earlier you were saying that you were optimistic about the way things are going. With the rise of technology and ethology, how do you see the future of animal behavior research evolving, and what potential ethical considerations should we be mindful of? That the second half of that question is pretty self-evident, but
Yeah,
please.
that's a great question. Since I'm on the ground, I do some research, but not as much as I used to. But I work with a lot of students and younger academics, younger professors. Many, many more now want to do more ethical, if you will, less invasive work. A lot of it's motivated by the ethics. What right do we have to step into the animals' lives and harm and kill them and change their behavior? But like I said before, some of it's just motivated, which is fine with me if it results in more humane research. Some is motivated by we want more reliable data. If you're going to go out and try to, quote, manage or coexist with other individuals of other species, you better have a really good idea about who they are and how they behave. So there's a woman in Australia, Gisela Kaplan, who's been very concerned about the inhumane treatment of birds, for example, birds research subjects, if you will, birds. So she's written a lot about that. And I'm very heartened by the emails I get from people doing research who go, I really want to study a particular question, but I don't want to have to mark or trap or handle and mess up the lives of the animals. So that's just part of the genesis of compassionate conservation.
Right.
So I'm hopeful, and more people are watching, more lay people, if you will, non-researchers, non-academics are really carefully watching and asking hard questions about research methodology in animal behavior and behavioral ecology, for example. So it ain't happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but I do really believe that things are slowly changing for the better, and I can only hope that momentum continues.
I agree with you. In the last decade, I've been somebody, as a younger millennial, at going on 32 years old now. I have been a very glass half full person on this issue
Mm-hmm.
with the direction that humanity as a whole is going into. I think we're going to be okay. I've actually been very optimistic just from a generational standpoint as millennials are taking over globally in these next couple years, truly coming into power. So many across, regardless of what country you're in, just from from a generational perspective, so many see the value in nature, other animals. You can see it in media, in TV, or in the news. So many of the younger generations see this value, like myself, recognize it, and are actively pushing for it. And so I am extremely optimistic of where things are going to go. I think things are going to get better. I agree with you; they're not happening as fast as I personally would like,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think we are getting there.
Yeah, and I agree with you because I work with youngsters and oldsters and people of all ages globally. And of course, that's been one of the messages from Jane Goodall. She's a messenger of hope from the United Nations. She wrote a great book called Reasons for Hope. And it's not misplaced or feigned. She, you, I, and others really think that people are going to get sick and tired of the way we've been treating animals and the planet, animals and their homes, including humans, of course, and we need to change our ways. So we're trying to just reverse the course, and it's sometimes easier to start a car than to stop it. But I do think that people are also feeling much more alienated from nature. And I wrote a book called Rewilding Our Hearts that focuses on that. And people feel alienated and alone. And getting out in nature, we know for many, maybe not all people, but for many people really helps them. It increases their well-being. It increases their optimism. And then people are discovering, well, the places they used to go to walk or hike or ride or run or whatever no longer exist. So,
It's true. They're going away fastly. They're being
yep.
they're being bulldozed for development, or what have you. And yes, we're losing a lot of what I actually that was going to be my next topic, going into the rewilding of our hearts, which is a concept I absolutely love. Nature is vital for our well-being and getting a little spiritual, our soul, because
Yeah.
we are nature. We are a part of nature, and only with I want to say since around the Industrial Revolution and really getting ourselves away from nature, because there was, if you think about it from an anthropological sense over time, we were afraid of nature. Nature was the darkness. It was the dark forest, the deep heart of the ocean where
Mm-hmm.
predators and, just survival came from. So, and we get to this point of development where we can get out of this. We're safe from nature, but
Mm-hmm.
then nature then became something to exploit and use. And now we're getting to a point of getting back to nature, getting back into, going out,
Mm-hmm.
seeing like I can go outside, like if I'm having a terrible week, I'm having an absolutely horrid day. If I go outside and I just stare at the trees and I just watch them move and sway with the breeze, instantly within moments, I am just uplifted, just
Yeah.
watching the majesty of nature just breathe.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people don't feel that. But what I hope is that, it's sort of like Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring. When the bird song disappeared, it really called attention to insecticides, for
A
example.
seminal work in the history.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't realize, or I'm discovering a good number of people don't realize that when they go outside, even if they don't pay attention to the sounds or the smells, or the visual stimuli, if you will, when those disappear, they miss them. And I've heard people say, "Wow, it's really quiet out here. I never really took in the sounds of bird song or insects chirping." But when it disappears, they miss it. So somehow something is going on physiologically for them, and they may not be aware of it consciously. So it's a horrible way to look at it, but maybe the losses and the impending, really rampant losses of the sounds and smells and visuals of nature are going to get people to, if you will, rewild their hearts, because that's the way I like to cash it out, and really make internal changes that then guide and direct their behavior into saving habitats or saving individuals of one or many species.
Right. In your book, The Emotional Lives of Animals, you delve into the rich emotional tapestry of non-human beings. It's an incredible book, wonderful work.
Thank you.
Listener, please pick it up. It is an amazing book. If you care about animals, you really should read this book. It's phenomenal.
Thank you.
For our listeners, could you share an example from your research that particularly highlights the complexity of animal emotions in a way that might surprise our listeners?
Yeah, once again, there are so many examples, but early on when we were studying coyotes in the Grand Teton National Park outside of Jackson, Wyoming, and some of your listeners may have been there, and we were studying them for 8.5 years around an area called Blacktail Butte. A female coyote disappeared from the pack in which she lived, and the pack was made up of her mate, her husband, and her children of different generations. And we realized we weren't seeing mom, that's what we called her. And but we and at the same time we realized that the behavior of her husband at the time and her children who were still around changed a lot. And it was palpable. My students would say, "Well, she's gone. We haven't seen her in days or a couple of weeks, and they are obviously missing her and, if you will, grieving her absence." Back then, it was almost risky to say that because people would think you're just, you're
Well,
loony.
they would think you were anthropomorphizing the animal.
Right, exactly. And I don't even use that word because people who worry about that are
I know it's
completely
nonsense.
touch. But you're right. Those were some examples. And then I studied play behavior for decades. And when we were watching young coyotes play, we were noticing there were same patterns of play as we had seen in captive coyotes. And then we started to realize that some cheaters, like I invite you to play and I try to beat you up or eat you or mate with you, were leaving the group, and they weren't being driven out of the group. It's just that other coyotes were ignoring their play invitations or not responding to them or giving those individuals no attention. The reason I mention that from an evolutionary point of view, it's huge because when the young coyotes who couldn't form and maintain social bonds with their pack mates dispersed, they suffered higher mortality. So there was a real evolutionary, if you will, in biology, we would call it a fitness component to saying, if you want to play, play. But if you're going to play and cheat, other animals don't want you around. And they won't, like I said, they won't necessarily force you out of the group. But, we've all probably been members of groups where we don't feel particularly close and we leave. It's not a bad or
Oh, that I mean, I work as a substitute teacher
yeah.
a lot of the time during the day. You see that in classrooms
Oh,
with just children.
exactly. And this was a lot of years ago, and people weren't so open to it. But of course, people came to realize that it wasn't only coyotes or social carnivores like wolves or bears, it was dogs and birds and other animals. They don't like cheaters around. Simple. But I mean, that was a good example of wild animals. People couldn't say, well, you, not meaning only me, but you're only studying captive animals. No, these are wild animals. I mean, these and people have seen the same patterns in wild wolves and bears, and like I said, birds and fish. I mean, it's your question before about things getting better. People are also expanding the taxonomy of the animals they study. So there's detailed studies of fish cognition and emotion, detailed study of reptilian cognition and emotions. And we're learning a lot, and we're learning that they can be very bright and emotional individuals.
Absolutely. I would love to know, how do you envision the future of human animal relationships evolving, especially in the context of increasing urbanization and technological advancement? Uh, if I may, let's pretend we're in the future. It's however many years in the future. I would love to know, in an ideal world, what would things look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, we would have much more symmetrical, respectful, compassionate, kind, dignified relationships with non human animals. They have a right to be here. And what we're learning through a relatively recent, although it's been around longer than a lot of people know, movement called the One Health movement. That's what's good for, quote, them, non humans, is good for us. It's the foundation in many ways of Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots program, where we're caring for animals, people, and the environment, animals, people, and their homes. So, the new information we're learning that being outside is good for you and it's good for the animals when you bond with them is kind of the root, if you will, of the future. And it's part of rewilding ourselves as individuals, rewilding our hearts. I do think that the pandemic as well added to that alienation quotient, if you will. And now more and more people want to be outside. And, in the best of all possible worlds, that will be part of the solution for more symmetrical and respectful relationships, forming respectful and symmetrical relationships with non-humans and their homes.
I'm glad you brought up the One Health movement, because one of our guest speakers for later on in the season is Dr. Aisha Akhtar.
She is an amazing woman. The world needs her and others of her ilk, if you will. Yep.
So, to come to a close, as our conversation comes to a close, what's the one thought or message that you'd like our listeners to, well, to pause and reflect on after today's episode?
Well, I mean, the one, I always say that there's more than one, but yeah, the one is that realize that you as an individual are important. I don't care who you are or where you live, and that you can make a positive difference in human animal interactions, in human environmental interactions. So pick something about which you're passionate and go for it. Don't let people tell you, oh, it's going to be impossible, or who cares about those ants, or who cares about those birds, or who cares about that pristine forest. You care about it, go do it. And I really mean that. And that's, once again, the message that I love to give to children. It's a message Jane Goodall gives to everyone is you count. You can make a positive difference in the world. And don't let anybody tell you you can't. There's your one.
Absolutely beautiful. And it's a beautiful message
I
that
mean, it's a
I
big one, but
fully agree with.
you wanted one, so it's kind of maybe one and a half. But yeah,
No,
no,
it's a great message.
I really do, and I see that enthusiasm that I mean, when I and others talk to people, and we really empower them. You're part of the world. Don't let somebody tell you that you don't count, and what you do makes a difference. And focus on the positive differences you can make, not, if you will, the negative impacts you've had or we have. Just always looking to a positive future. I will stop there because that's really what I think is going to make a big difference in the future.
I fully agree. If you want to live in a better world, then you have to believe that you can help make that world. You got to
That's
believe it's possible. Because if you don't believe it, then you're actively, subconsciously, well, not even actively, but subconsciously, you're working against it. You got to believe that we can get there.
Yeah, and I always say work for the animals, not against people. If you don't agree with somebody, fine. You don't need to interact with them. but don't spend your time, don't spend your time talking to people who are never going to change, because I would hope you wouldn't change. And I really mean that. I'm not going to change certain views. And if I'm talking to someone who isn't going to change their views, it doesn't mean that they don't count. It's just I don't have time or energy or money, if you will, to spend trying to convince you. So just move on and work with people with whom you feel compatible when you reach the point where somebody is just kind of wasting your time and energy and money.
Utilize your energy wisely.
Absolutely. It's a good bumper sticker.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Marc Bekoff, for joining us today. This has been a true honor to have you on the podcast. Is there anything that you would like to plug for our listeners? Anywhere we can reach you on social media? Anything that you think our listeners should be aware of that you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you could find my homepage, marcbekoff.com, is a good place to find what I've done. This book, The Emotional Lives of Animals, just came out. And for those who don't know, Jane Goodall turned 90 years old on April 3rd.
That's right.
And my colleague Kuhn Margot and I, we co-chair the ethics committee for the Jane Goodall Institute. We put this book together and we gave it to Jane around New Year's because we did not want the secret to get out. And Dr. Goodall had no idea about the book. She was absolutely shocked.
Really?
And it's a wonderful, up close and personal views from 90 people who know Jane well. Up close and personal.
So for the 90 years, you got 90 people to
we call it the 90
word.
candles. Yes.
I love that.
The 90 essays are the 90 candles, including a lot of pretty high profile people. But what I really love about the book, not only that Jane was shocked, because sometimes it's hard to shock a woman like Jane, is that it's a very up close and personal book. What we say in the blurb about the book is you'll learn about the, quote, real Jane. Yes, she's a heartfelt woman. Yes, she works hard. Yes, she's an optimist. Yes, she's changed the lives of millions of people around the world. And she also likes playing prairie dog, as if she's a prairie dog. And I really
sort of popping in and out.
Yeah, jumping up and doing these different displays. But what I love about the book as well is how everybody converged on who Jane is as a hopeful person, an optimist, a wonderful woman, but just came to it from different backgrounds: researchers, philanthropists, actors, actresses, singers. So those are the two books that I'm really remarkable today. And like I said, I'm actually personally thrilled with the second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals. It's a rather different book from the first, although, there's still a lot of material that's repeated. But The Emotional Lives of Animals, Take 2, is a call for action with no more BS. We need to do better, and we know enough to motivate everyone to do something for whoever you want to work for, whichever animal. So, yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Marc Bekoff, for joining us today. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate being here, Alexander.
Thank you for tuning in to Pause and Reflect, a podcast made possible by ROLDA, the Romanian League in Defense of Animals. Today's conversation reminds us of the power of empathy, the importance of stewardship, and the ripple effect of individual actions towards collective change. If today's story inspired you, please share this episode and help spread the message of hope and action. Every little bit counts. I'm Alexander Taylor Clayton, reminding you to reflect on the role you play in this intricate web of life. Until next time, keep positive and carry the spirit of compassion and curiosity wherever you go.